Those of you who are outside of Trinidad and Tobago, welcome to another one of our communication events where I have come out of hiding to make myself available to the media. I'm sure had I known that I would have been so sorely missed, I would have come out since last week. But I read the papers every day. In fact, sometimes before I go to bed at night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, I read to see what's going to come out the next day. And the next morning, at 5 o'clock, I look at it again and see if it's the same thing. So I'm one of these people who spend a lot of time following the media because I want to see what is being told to the national community. Because I really would like the national community to be exercised and to take positions based on fact and not fiction, on truth and not lies. So last week, there was quite a bit of media activity and media energy about activities of the government, and some persons who did not see the conclusion that they anticipated took that to mean that my absence from the press conference was that I was in hiding. Let me just say something very clearly now, as we come to the end of, approaching the end of the term of this government which I lead. From day one, I can say today, without fear of contradiction, that no other Prime Minister in the history of Trinidad and Tobago has ever been so accessible to the media and has ever made him or herself available so frequently and for so long at events where I give you the opportunity to ask as many questions as you have, and I try to answer them. And of course, another problem that the country has is that there is a difficulty in accepting truth because there's been so many lies being told to the country for so long, particularly by persons who are protective of their office and their position, that the population has become accustomed to persons lying to them, not the least of which prime ministers. And I don't have to go into any examples to prove that to you. You live here. But in opposition and in government, I have taken the position that what I say to the population must be truthful and cannot be rebutted by any other information which is also truthful. So having said that, I just want to let you know that I'm available this evening for as long as you want to ask as many questions as you like about the government that I lead, and I'll try to assist you with answers that are helpful, not just to you in this room, but to the national community at large. We are, this week, coming close to another one of the phases that we had outlined. You remember we had outlined 6 phases as to how we proceed to move ourselves out of what we call the lockdown and the close down to getting back out into the workplace, and to be careful that as we do so, we do it in a way that we manage the risk and protect the wider national community. The last time I met you, I was able to advance the initial schedule of phase 2. Today I will not deal with that. I will let you know that I'll come back on Saturday at 2 o'clock because I have a meeting with the team. We meet as a team and we have the medical experts, we have the Minister of Health, Minister of National Security, and we meet and we go over the facts and the data, and we are coming close to the end of another cycle, because you would, if you were following Dr. Parasam in particular, you would have heard him talking about the cycle, why we have to wait for 14 days or approaching 14 days before we can come to a definitive inference as to what is happening around us. And we also, in that not twilight, but that zone of comfort, a dangerous zone of comfort where it's almost over a month now that we have not had a confirmation. And it is very easy for our population to take the position in many places around the country, in the home, in the street, in the park, in the workplace, that we had a pandemic problem. I simply want to emphasize again, we're not using the past tense, we are still very present. Because one of the problems that we're facing, because we have been successful in the initial period of keeping the virus out, our population has a very low resistance to the virus. We have built up no immunity at the national level. And that is one side of that story. So therefore, if we, as we come out, if we get the virus amongst us, it can wreak havoc. Those of you who follow the news, you will see that while we are minded to go towards the position that Trinidad and Tobago has gone to 0 confirmations over a number of weeks, in Brazil next door, Brazil is not very far from here in case you don't know that. Northern Brazil is just, by air, couple hours southeast of us. And they're going through some horrible times right now. I mean, very heartbreaking if you look at what's going on there. In the United States, away from New York, thankfully New York is seeing a downturn, very much like we are seeing here. They started from a much higher peak. We started a little lower, but the bottom line is they've gone in the right direction. But they're still, only today, the mayor of New York is saying, the governor of New York is saying that it's too early to open back the state, the city, as they would love it to be. In Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom, we still have serious problems there. And of course, we here in Trinidad and Tobago have to be careful that as we come out, thankfully, having not had a bad period, we come out and be careful not to introduce a relapse, if you want to call it that. So on Saturday, we would be in a position, after our meeting with the experts and with the government officials, and I will take certain decisions, and hopefully, if the trend continues, today is Thursday, we have another 2 days. If we get the same data, I expect to be in a position to advise of some significant opening up, and I think that would be good news for those persons who have been directly affected by the withdrawal that we have done, because we did withdraw in a very significant way, and it is that withdrawal from normal behavior that has allowed us to not be amongst those who have been hit the hardest. So yesterday I went out to meet those workers who are among the first to have come out, because you remember the last time I was here, we opened up manufacturing, and I visited 4 manufacturing centers, and I was very impressed with what I saw. I met people whose morale was very high, very excited to be back out to work, and of course production has been going on in these companies in a way that we've been very impressed. I visited one of our oldest companies in Trinidad, actually, CPI, a packaging company that is, aiming to expand its business, which is good news. Expansion and investment in expansion today in this kind of climate is good news. So we left there feeling that this is one company that is going to bring us good news in the months ahead and so on. In terms of export and new products, I then went to a company that is using some of our agricultural input, Nestle, which is one of our major exporters, because here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have the export production capacity, and we service a significant portion of the region using world-class technology. I saw that yesterday. And most importantly, as I went through these companies at TYE and in Frederick Settlement, the electrical equipment production company, and the food preparation company, Vemco in Diego Martin and the Diamond Vale Industry. The one thing that I was very pleased to see is how these companies, which we chose at random, these companies were chosen at random, and they were given less than 24 hours notice that I'll be visiting them. And I was very pleased to see how responsive these entities were in following the guidelines and the instructions given by the health department and the government. The workers were in their face masks where they were relatively close and were moving around, where they were inside, spaced out. There were cubicles protected by perspex barriers. Their sanitation arrangements were all around in the companies as you enter the compound. In fact, one company I had to sanitize myself way before I got to the front door. And then, you know, so I was pleased with that because as has been directed, the most, if I take as a random sample, most of these companies are in fact complying, and complying in a way that will allow these responses to be long-term and sustained. Because, as we said before, as we're saying now, this is going to stay with us for quite some time. So what I saw were arrangements for the long haul. And once that is so, we expect to have good results. And during the week, you would have heard the Minister of National Security respond to those persons who were on the outside when we closed the border. And we are discovering where they are, who they are. We didn't know many of them, but we knew we had people out there. I told you we had 330,000 people out there. 330,000. And the catering, I mentioned the one, I said, suppose 5,000 of those persons came home in the height of the pandemic. Our health system would have been overwhelmed. We had to make a decision, and that decision was made, but we left some people outside. And we are cautiously but steadily bringing them home, and the Ministry of National Security is managing that under the advice of the CMO, the Ministry of Health. So we are doing what has to be done, and we are empathizing with those persons for whom staying out for that long is stressful. It's a mental health issue. But it's an issue that one has to see, what is the alternative? What was the alternative? What is the alternative? For those who are critical of what we are doing or how fast we're doing it, do not forget why we are doing it or why we have done it. What is the alternative? The alternative is to try and solve one problem by creating a greater problem. We try to avoid that. But we know that there are problems to be solved, and we're solving them along the way. So this evening, I am here to just brief you on that and to take whatever questions that might have been exercising you during the period of the last 10 days or so we can get back on track where Trinidad and Tobago can be said to have a prime minister that is not hiding from the media. Because last week, I'm sure you wrote a lot of pages about that, quite incorrectly. I'm here at your disposal, so question time.
Right, Minister, given that Minister Dennis Moses would have said that this country is not, in Parliament, he would have said this country is not bound by recent decisions made in relation to the Rio Treaty. Was that position also conveyed to Ambassador Mondello when you met with him on the 20th, and what would have been his response to that?
I'm not going to respond to your question in the way you've put it. I would take the opportunity. I expected this question, so I'd like to ask the staff to put on the screen a statement I made to the media in September last year, having come back to Trinidad. I think that was October 1st, when I came back from addressing the United Nations. So I'm not answering you about what I told Mr. Mondello. I'm answering you in what Trinidad and Tobago told the world and what I told you, the media and the country, at September last year when I came back from the United Nations. Let's just spend a couple minutes looking at that. In the region, and my first visit was to the Secretary General to further these discussions and to alert the Secretary General again to a development which was taking place. I should say is taking place, slightly under the radar, but that development is the week when I was in Washington, which was 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting of the same South American group, the Lima group, but it's more of the Lima group. It was the OAS. As you may recall, the OAS, which contains all the countries of the region, including all the CARICOM countries, has got itself into a bit of a neutering by virtue of how it conducted its business. The OAS, with respect to the Venezuelan situation, has become quite unacceptable and impotent as a player in the matter. Because of how the OAS conducted its business, the end result was that Venezuela withdrew from the OAS. The OAS accepted in the organization, which we consider to be quite illegal, representation from the Guaido faction who declared themselves president of Venezuela and so on. And of course, the OAS was out front in January and onwards with respect to this whole question of the requirement for an intervention in Venezuela. So having not been accomplished in the way that it was anticipated in January, a new move has taken place inside of the OAS. There's a treaty called the Rio Treaty, not the OAS Treaty. There's a sub-treaty called the Rio Treaty, of which Trinidad and Tobago, Bahamas, and Haiti are the only CARICOM members. The rest of the membership is the rest of the OAS. So this Rio Treaty has a clause which is very broad. It dates back to the very early 60s when Cuba was a thorn in the side of the Western countries, this communist country in the Caribbean. And of course, you know, the early 60s were the age of the Bay of Pigs and the Cold War and the Russian presence in Cuba and so on and so on. This OAS treaty has a clause which says that if a nation is deemed to be a security risk to the rest of the region, the countries of the region have the authority to intervene in that nation on the grounds of the troublesome nation being a security risk. So what has happened recently is that at the OAS, just before I went to Washington, in fact, while I was in Washington, our ambassador was attending those OAS meetings. He had to go and the vote was taking place there on this Rio Treaty, you see. This Rio Treaty says that the countries of the region, of which only 3 CARICOM countries have a vote, the 3 I just mentioned, Bahamas, Haiti, and Trinidad and Tobago, could vote to intervene in any country that these signatories deem to be a security risk. And a vote was put to deem Venezuela to be a regional security risk, and therefore the Rio Treaty could be invoked for an intervention in Venezuela. This was being done because if a vote is taken in the OAS, then all these CARICOM members have a vote. All 13, 14, 11, what's the exact number? Anyway, but if your vote is taken in the Rio Treaty, then you exclude the CARICOM. Now, CARICOM has been resolute that we are opposed to military intervention, and we are favoring, and we would support, and we have been supporting, and we continue to support the dialogue and negotiation towards a peaceful resolution to any political difficulty in Venezuela or anywhere else for that matter. So this invocation of the Rio Treaty, which some people refer to as an obsolete treaty, because it's a relic of the Cold War, which has never been used, and in today's world, to say that you could intervene in another country because you don't like the government is a dangerous development. Not to mention that it runs counter to the Charter of the United Nations and the Constitution of the OAS itself. It's a bit of an anachronism, but it's there. And we find ourselves a member of that treaty dating back to its origin. So I went to the United Nations to alert the Secretary General to what was happening with respect to the OAS treaty, the Rio Treaty being invoked, and the threat that it posed, taking us back to where we were in January. Interestingly enough, when the vote took place 2 weeks ago, 3 countries from South America and Central America voted against it. Those countries were Costa Rica, Panama, and one other. But Trinidad and Tobago abstained. because we are not supporting that. We abstained. Cuba is a member of the Rio Treaty, but Cuba was not present. Another vote was put for when everybody is together again at the UN last week. And of course, at that time, by that time, the three countries that voted against in Washington voted for in New York. So Trinidad and Tobago, and of course Uruguay, Mexico voted, well, did not support it. I tell you this so you can understand that the whole issue of the security of the region is not to be taken for granted, because there are powerful forces engaged in seeking to bring about military intervention as a solution to political problems. Now, the kinds of pressure that is brought to bear in Trinidad and Tobago by persons known and unknown, countries known and unknown, is known to the government. It might not be known to you, the media, or whatever, but we know who we're dealing with and what we're dealing with. And we conduct the business of Trinidad and Tobago, making sure that we stay laser focused on the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is why when we saw people misrepresenting our receipt of refugees, we know what that means. We know what that means for Trinidad and Tobago. To portray us as a country harboring or receiving or bad treating a number of refugees from Venezuela is all part of this whole question of how do we get done what we want to get done. And the timing of certain reportage and certain publications and certain votes and so on, we don't set those timetables. Others do it. Because our position is the same Sunday as it is on Monday, as it is on Friday. Rooted in the CARICOM published position of non-intervention, non-interference, which are the elements of the treaties that we've signed on to at the United Nations and at the OAS. So that was my first meeting. We had, I had that, speaking not just for Trinidad and Tobago, but for CARICOM on this whole development of the intended use of the Rio Treaty to declare a country a security risk and therefore open to the invoking of the Rio Treaty to bring about a political regime change. Let me just say, I hope you remember that. That was September last year. I noticed that much of what was written about the Rio Treaty came in our local script last week. It was like a brand new bolt out of the night. I just want to say that another difficulty that we had with the Rio Treaty, which in fact, when I speak about a clause being invoked, what I didn't say then was that interpretation for invocation. And another difficulty that we had, Trinidad and Tobago, and none of this is in secret. This was said in public here in Trinidad and Tobago. We do not recognize any government in Venezuela other than the government that is recognized by the United Nations. You may recall that when the ambassadorial exchanges or recalls took place, and it looked as if hostilities were imminent between two regional powers, CARICOM sent a delegation to the United Nations. I was a part of that delegation, led by the chairman of CARICOM. We went to the United Nations, and in public, we were told that the government seated at the United Nations is the government of Venezuela, the Maduro government. And that is the position of Trinidad and Tobago. We're not taking sides with anybody. We're just staying with the facts. But there's a difficulty in Venezuela. There were those who, including the opposition in Trinidad and Tobago, who accepted and proclaimed another president in Venezuela, President Guaido. Publicly, we said in Trinidad and Tobago as government, That is not our position. Our foreign policy was not to accept that position. So that was no secret. And of course, that being so, when President Guaido was allowed to place officers and officials in a meeting of the OAS to deal with the Rio Treaty and take a decision, we in Trinidad and Tobago took the position. If we're not accepting Guaido as the president of Venezuela, it follows that we can't accept Guaido's appointees at the OAS or anywhere for that matter. And we took reservation at the OAS, at the Rio Treaty meeting, that we are taking a reservation on any decision you make because the decision you're making is faulty. You have seated someone to represent a country who is not the government of that country. And if there are people who have a problem with that, well, we see it's just a difference of opinion. And why is this so important to Trinidad and Tobago? Why is it not a problem for Jamaica and Haiti and Hispaniola? Why? It's a problem for us because we are 7 miles from Venezuela. And for centuries, that 7-mile gap has been an open highway between this island and that continental country. And we have within our border already 16,000 Venezuelans who came here in a time of no military action. You could imagine how many would want to come here. 1, if there's military intervention and military action, and 2, if there's a pandemic crisis in Venezuela. And that is Trinidad and Tobago's interest to be served.
Prime Minister, in light of all that was said just now, is Trinidad and Tobago considering pulling out of the Rio Treaty?
We have taken no such position, and we've told that to no one, and any speculation of that nature will have to be subject to the reflection of time.
Prime Minister, what you just showed us there, was that communicated to the ambassador? Because the meeting happened
I am not engaging in any discussion with the ambassador. I went kilometers above that. I went to the United Nations. I went to speaking to the world. I went to speaking to you. And last week you had a field day about the ambassador. I am not dealing with that because the ambassador does not change what I've just said there. And you are just engaging in speculation and misrepresentation of that. Because last week I took careful note of a number of instances of misrepresentations by elements of the local media who do that in furtherance of preservation of their own agenda or the story they carry on Monday. And even when apologies were written, those who fed off the wrongdoing continued, even though the source of the wrongdoing had apologized. So I'm not going to allow you to misrepresent anything here to the public of Trinidad and Tobago today. I am here all evening with you to make sure when I leave here, the people of Trinidad and Tobago have the facts, know the facts, and they once again see their public position being reiterated. Yes, Uvashi.
Mr. Prime Minister, good afternoon. Urvashi from TV6. Now, given your statement from, it was 2019, October, September 2019, you seem to have some premonition of our current circumstance. Within the past week, with all the hype over the Rio Treaty, as you mentioned, I spoke with Professor Andy Knights, former director of the Institute of International Relations at U. And his position is that the treaty is old, it's antiquated. He feels that it's being used in a way which contravenes international law. He went so far as to say that we may have been bullied by the U.S. Do you share this perspective?
I'm not going to tell you what perspective I share, but I will tell you that the main point that Professor Andy Knight published last week was that the treaty, we spent a lot of time last week getting ourselves tangled up into knots over. His position was that the treaty is a defense treaty, which we know. It's about defense for a nation under attack, and his view is as you describe it. So that's a point of view but we, as the government of Trinidad and Tobago, even if there are points of view from others who don't agree with us, we have a duty to the people of Trinidad and Tobago to have a point of view, which is based on our understanding of our circumstance. And that is how we fashion our foreign policy, not on who might or might not agree with us. There has to be a basis. And last week was a terrible week for truth in Trinidad and Tobago, because a lot of what was published either was published by persons who were ill-informed, malicious, or just sad. Because last week, while you thought I was hiding, I was reading everything you wrote, right? You even reached a point of calling for minister's head, taking objection to me being in my garden when I should be firing minister. I mean, even my garden you had trouble with. So anyway, but this is Trinidad and Tobago. We have a wonderful time in these kind of petty things. But this is not petty. This is a serious matter of the foreign policy of Trinidad and Tobago. And unfortunately, there's division in Trinidad and Tobago about it. And one side of it is a division based on the facts and you said nervousness of our circumstance. We have to be nervous. Because if it is, when last you look at the map of the northern South America, you see where Trinidad and Tobago is? Trinidad and Tobago is a tiny little island in the mouth of the Orinoco. The Orinoco itself is wider than Trinidad and Tobago, in the mouth of the Orinoco. And we are 7 miles from that country, connected to the rest of South America. And of course, we are well connected to the north and to the east, and we are an integral part of the Caribbean. So if things are going to go pear-shaped, we have to be nervous. Look at how nervous we were. When Venezuelans were coming here by the tens of thousands, we had to intervene and put visa on them to stop that from happening. And of course, when we did that, the same kind of responses we got from those who are misrepresenting our foreign policy, we got when we dealt with that Venezuelan situation. But that shouldn't be of any news to us. We live that every day. We live that every day. But Trinidad and Tobago, we anchored ourselves in CARICOM and in saying that our best position, the best position for us, is to defend our zone of peace. And we also ensure and demand the right to be neutral. The first question I had here this evening was about us, Trinidad and Tobago, siding with the Maduro government. That sounds good, but let's examine it. We're not doing that. We, with CARICOM, went to the UN, we talked about dialogue as against military intervention, and we said, we in Trinidad and Tobago, we offered our country as a place for both sides to dialogue. We speak to both sides, because Venezuela has issues, and there are people on different sides. We don't take sides, speak to both sides. We offer Trinidad and Tobago, if it is their wish, to be a place where they meet and talk. Barbados did the same thing, right? The meetings took place in Barbados under the auspices, the good office of the government of Norway, working with CARICOM, because we are going down the road, which is the road that says this political problem can only be solved properly, and which would not destroy us here in the Caribbean if we go down the road of dialogue. That is public, all of that is public. Public position, there were meetings in Barbados. We took part in meetings. The Canadians invited us, we encouraged the Canadians to pull the meeting together. Our foreign minister, we take part in these situations. We are in constant contact with people for the interests of Trinidad and Tobago, not just Delcy Rodriguez. We talk to a lot of people. So when you take the position that we don't know what we're doing, and we should bring the minutes of the meeting for you to see, we talk to a lot of people. And it's not everything that we talk about we bring to you in Woodford Square. So,
you started off the press conference by talking about Trinidad and Tobago being averse to the truth, particularly from Prime Minister.
I didn't say that. I might have said something that meant the truth is regularly a casualty in our national conversation.
But in the sake of the truth and getting the truth out there, are you willing to discuss what was discussed in the meeting with the U.S. ambassador, or at least come to what was the final decision, if any, taken during that meeting?
But you spent the whole of last week on that. You had a publication from the U.S. ambassador, which you exercised yourself with whole week. You had a call for the resignation of the minister. You had 3 or 4 editorials from me. What? You come to the point now. You want me to come clean, right? I have nothing more to add. Because you see, The truth has one version. Yesterday, there was a story in the Express, whole page, and at the end of it, there was a paragraph, the last paragraph. You know what the last paragraph said? After they interviewed people, and interesting interviews from interviewees, reportage, reported speech. But the last paragraph wasn't reported speech. The last paragraph was the position. There it is. Thank you very much. My staff is clicking. That is the last paragraph at the end of a week of harassment of the country. And that said, could you put the last paragraph up for me, please? This is the last paragraph. All right. Look at that first line. Worse. Worse, eh? Because there were bad things written, certain bad things were mentioned in the article. Worse, the Prime Minister has come out to say he also did not know who was in the room at the time of the Venezuelan VP visit. When did I ever say that? Yeah, we're talking, you're among friends. Tell me, when did the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago ever say that? That was one of the bullocks of the attack on the government for telling lies. And that sentence painted the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago as a liar. Because I never said that. As a matter of fact, on more than one occasion, I said, as you were agitating the country, I said, I met with 2 Venezuelans. One was Delcy Rodriguez, the other was Mr. Chavez, who was not the president of PDVSA, and therefore no one was introduced to me in that meeting as president of PDVSA. I said that more than once. Right? But look at what's written there. That was the Express yesterday, bolstering a story of the whole week, harassing people with lies. And then the other pillar that kept it up was the other one that Minister Young said this and Minister Young said that and caused all kind of reason. And then about a week after, the Newsday put an apology. But that didn't prevent the Express from continuing, and it didn't prevent the Guardian from continuing based on what the Newsday had apologized for. But that is what the government has to live with in Trinidad and Tobago. Because in Trinidad and Tobago, let me say this here now, we don't have an independent, or we don't have independent media houses in Trinidad and Tobago. What we have are media houses that have interests to protect. And if you think I don't know what is going on, I know exactly what is going on, and will speak to it in full at future times. Because this kind of behavior, don't tell me that you did not know I did not say that. Because I speak to you openly in Parliament. I hear from this podium. And if as Prime Minister I say I was in a meeting with 5 people, and you come out and telling the country, telling little children that I didn't know who was in the meeting. And of course, another minister said the other people who were in the delegation never came into the meeting. They were taken down a corridor and held in a holding bay until the meeting over and they left. Look at where we are here now. You know how it goes? My office is next door. If you come out of here, go straight there, that's my office. Whenever I'm meeting a delegation, big or small, I'm upstairs until my staff, when they're ready for me downstairs, I walk down the steps, take the first door on the right, and that is the meeting in that room. Whoever else is here, media, whoever else is here, the meeting is as I enter the door. And who is not in that room is not in the meeting. Not in Trinidad, not here last week. Last week, that was not common sense. Anybody who was anywhere in St. Anne's was in the meeting. And I was supposed to know them, their grandmother, and their neighbor name. Yeah? And who's the fellow? Narayan partner? You know much Pastor Stewart.
So what was Mr. Chavez therefore doing in a COVID-19 meeting that you said dealt with the national security aspect, hence the need
you gotta ask the Vice President of Venezuela that. I didn't pick a delegation for her.
So you didn't wonder anybody from your ministry?
I spoke only to the Vice President. I spoke only to the Vice President. So if she brings a delegation, it is not for me to determine. I take delegations about. I took a delegation to Ghana the other day. Nobody asked me why X or Y was in that delegation. Nobody in Ghana asked me that.
Did he speak in the meeting at all? Did he have any contribution, Mr. Chavez? Did he have any contribution to the meeting?
Not that I'm aware of.
two people, the VP and Mr. Chavez. And
those were the only people who were in the meeting. And we said to you before what the meeting was about, and why I want to put that a bit, you are never going to accept what I'm telling you because you have a problem with the truth. That is the problem. If you know something else, you tell me, you tell the country. I am telling you the truth. So when you tell me to come clean, and I have told you all the truth, you're asking me to lie to protect myself? I'm not going to do that. To protect the government, I'm not going to do that. To create more stories, I'm not going to do that. That is what it is.
You said come clean, so those were your words. What prompted the meeting with Ambassador Mondello there? If you don't want to talk about specific, let's speak broad strokes here. It happened that day after he made the statement. Why did it need your intervention? Were things
No,
that
we talk all the time. As a matter of fact, contrary to the impression being given, we talk to all the people who we have to talk to. We have no barriers anywhere. So you kept trying to sell this story about we have a problem or this, that, and happening. We talk all the time. As a matter of fact,
coincidence it was a day after then?
No, I mean, it's part of my day's work. If there's something happening and I'm required to speak to somebody, I speak to them. Right? I mean, that meeting took place on Wednesday. I was being advised on Friday to have the meeting. The meeting had taken place since Wednesday. We had quite a cordial and interesting meeting. And in fact, that meeting allowed us to talk about other things because there were these tankers coming down here, going to Venezuela from Iran. That became a problem in Trinidad and Tobago. How and why? God alone knows. And Trinidad and Tobago. Because we know that those tankers that came from Iran going to Venezuela only became a problem in Trinidad because the opposition in Trinidad was moving heaven and earth to excite the Americans, telling them that Trinidad and Tobago was involved in facilitating these tankers. That's what is going on. It had absolutely nothing to do with us. Our Coast Guard was tracking those vessels to ensure that they didn't violate our marine space, and they didn't. But you had opposition politicians feeding the media fake tracks of the vessel and demanding of the media stories that Trinidad and Tobago was facilitating Iranian vessel-breaking sanctions. That is what our local opposition was doing. The vessels came, they passed, they got to Venezuela, 1, 2, 3, I don't know how many reached there. It nothing to do with us, nothing whatsoever, except that if it came to a confrontation between Venezuela and the United States and Iran, that would have taken place on our shores. And that is precisely why we did what we did. Go to the UN, encourage dialogue, stand neutral in the position. And I think you, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, should be very proud of your government for being in this situation.
So you're saying the opposition prompted the United States Embassy to send a correspondence to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on May 13th, bringing to the attention of the country that the 5 tankers that were coming and saying, we're asking we're requesting.
Who else you know in this country have been saying that this government in this country is involved in assisting the Iranians to break sanctions? Who else knows saying that? The only people we know saying that is the opposition, the UNC opposition. And therefore I have absolutely no hesitation in saying that that was done, and it was done for a purpose, to create mayhem in Trinidad and Tobago, because they think that they could manage to bring about sanctions on Trinidad and Tobago or on its officials, and that would sell bad in Trinidad and Tobago. We have nothing to do with it. Why are you calling our name there? Why was a UNC minister on that the night the first tanker was coming in here, publishing and harassing to say that the tanker is coming through Trinidad and Tobago's waters and it's being facilitated by Trinidad and Tobago? Why?
I think there's some sort of collaboration between the embassy of the US in Trinidad and the opposition.
I am not aware of that. I speak of what I know. If you know that there's collaboration, then maybe you might be able to assist us.
Is there a collaboration between the opposition and the media?
I would have to rely on you for that answer.
But you made some statements earlier on, and you said that the media has an interest. So I wanted to find out what interest is.
No, I didn't say the UNC. I said
no. You said the media had.
You don't know what the interest is. But the time has come for the population to know what the interest is, in case, because apparently you don't know. One media house is the head of a business. One media house is owned by a business conglomerate that has interests, and the government has taken decisions that's unfavorable to their interests. The other one, right, has business with the state, which the government is not facilitating, and then obviously the government is making enemies because they have interests to protect, we have interests to protect. Our interest is to protect the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Their interest is to protect their financial bottom line. And on many occasions we stand in the way. The government stands in the way of that. And if you aren't aware of that, then maybe you should be. And then you would not believe that what you see there is pure as the driven snow, and that there's no motive behind a lot of what has been harassing the psyche of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Last week was a particularly bad week for those conflicts. And there are going to be other days going forward. And what I've said, no, I expect that there are those who are going to say, who, me, not me. These are facts I'm telling you. So when the government takes a position, and I as Prime Minister have been very clear all along, whether I'm dealing with oil companies, newspaper conglomerates or what, I represent the people of Trinidad and Tobago because I'm only doing a job, J-O-B. And while I'm doing that job, I'm laser focused on the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And anybody who wants to engage me on that, I'm ready, I'm willing, and I'm able to be engaged on that because my linen could stand airing in the sun.
No, Prime Minister, the OCM, the government has shares in OCM though.
The what?
The government has shares in OCM, one of the conglomerates that you just... So is the government against the government?
We have not used the state's interest in OCM to influence the business there. So that is not relevant. If we had been doing that, then maybe some things might not have happened, but we have stood very clear. We got into those shareholdings because of victories that we've had, and in having those victories, we made enemies too. And we could discuss that at another time. We ended up with those shares because of battles that we fought for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and we won those battles. And having won those battles, we ended up saving $15 billion for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We created the NIF. When we established the NIF from that victory, we made enemies too. Because there were persons who did not like the fact that the government was putting the public as owners of bonds in that shareholding. They made proposals to us. We rejected those proposals. And we knew that we offended them. But we are for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And anybody who wants to challenge what I've said here, let us have the conversation going forward.
Get back to Trinidad and Tobago's international relations outlook. Now, what we really saw is a country, Trinidad and Tobago, claiming to be impartial. Then, at the beginning of the pandemic, as we felt it here, an exemption was granted to the Venezuelan vice president. It seems as though this did not sit well with the U.S. along with the issue of the fuel heading to Venezuela.
There are two separate things. Let us separate them. Two separate things. The week that was, or the fortnight that was, started with story about fuel. Trinidad and Tobago selling fuel to Venezuela. That has been debunked by the government, by the company, by the officials of this country. Your country did not do that. In quite normal and proper international trade, a business in which we are engaged, we sold fuel to a Swiss company going with its destination to Aruba. That's the end of it. So don't continue talking about the fuel that we sold to Venezuela. That was not our business. Nobody could show what we did was wrong. As a matter of fact, there has been no confirmation seen by me about any fuel going to Venezuela. Persons attach that to a visit by the Vice President of Venezuela. That's item number 2, and that I stand with. As I said, as the government of Trinidad and Tobago, 7 miles from Venezuela, with 30 million people, 16,000 in my country, in a pandemic, if the government next door wants to talk to me, what are you as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago saying to me, don't talk to the government of Venezuela? As a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, you might be a reporter, but you are a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. Are you saying to me that it is that the government of Trinidad and Tobago ought not to talk to the government of Venezuela? A government that the United Nations General Secretary sat on a table with me and a CARICOM team and said the government of Venezuela, acknowledged by the UN, is the government of Nicolas Maduro until it is changed, and properly so, to be seated at the United Nations. What do you want me to do, not talk to the government of Venezuela?
I think it is what happens going forward if the U.S. did in fact raise the Rio Treaty with us.
But I just discussed with you, the Rio Treaty was raised. We have a position on how the Rio Treaty is being raised. If what you're saying is that we are too small, we are too insignificant to object, then say so. But all we have said and all we have done is to preserve our position of neutrality where titans want to clash. That's all that's happened. And let us not compare ourselves and our interests with other people. Our interest is right here on the coast of the Orinoco, Trinidad and Tobago, with our neighbor there, facing geopolitical issues. What is Trinidad and Tobago to do but to have a position based on logic, based on fact, based on dignity, and based on bounded faith in our destiny?
Prime Minister, if you could move on.
Yes, sir.
Just a little bit. I want to talk about elections, upcoming elections.
Have you been screened?
Huh?
Have you been screened?
For which political party?
Well, don't disparage our political system in this country. We have a very good system. A lot of political parties, free and fair elections, and of course, you have the PNM. So. Are you interested? Afford you? Or you're one of those at a price, eh?
Prime Minister, how would the leading up to the elections look like in terms of rallies and walkabouts in this whole post-COVID world?
That's a very interesting proposition here. This time, like COVID, we are in an era that is quite new to us. The term of the government comes to an end, I think, towards the latter half of September. A general election is due within 90 days of that. So under normal circumstances, now at end of May, we'd have been at the height of election campaigning. But because in this year, in this probably hopefully once in a lifetime experience, we are having to withdraw from our normal outdoor activities, of which political activity was a major one in a time like this. And therefore, we are going to have a different kind of arrangement if we are to comply. And election or no election, we will have to comply with the requirements of the chief medical officer, because the virus is not going to give us a pass because we have an election. So hopefully we ought to be able to do certain things within the confines of the restrictions and do some things differently so as to communicate with the public. And at the end of the day, the public itself would notice that things are being done differently. And then, of course, elections are simply about choice. And we can have a really good choice, contrasting choices here in Trinidad and Tobago whenever the election is called.
So if we don't have elections, you said we may or may not have elections.
No, I didn't say that.
If or if not, was your example.
No, I said we are going to have elections. I said before and I'm saying again, we are going to have elections. But we're going to have to do things differently in campaigning for the election. What we're going to have are quite clear choices. That's what I said.
Staying on the topic of elections, just before we came here, the Express had published a story concerning Fuad Abubakar and him being screened for the Port of Spain South seat. Are you in a position?
Screened by whom? Which party?
By the PNM.
That You know who put that in the press? You know who put that in the press? Listen, the PNM this year is our 64th year, and we have a constitution which has been amended quite a few times. Our screening committee is not a pick-up side or an ad hoc group. Our screening committee is rooted in the party's constitution. To be screened in the PNM, first and foremost, you have to be a member. If you are not a member, maybe you have even recent vintage, but you have to be a member. And then even if you are a member, you have to put a consent in by a particular date. And when that deadline is passed, no member could get, unless of course you come for screening and the screening committee sends back and continues the process. And of course, if you have not put in a consent, no party group could nominate you and be a valid nomination. And if you are not nominated by a party group to be screened as a potential PNM candidate, you can't be part of the process. So with all of these safeguards in the PNM, I, as political leader, I got the list of people we're going to screen this evening because we have screening this evening. And I didn't see Fuad Bakadi about it, but I heard it in the news. Main item on the news. Just want to tell you that the news in Trinidad and Tobago is very exciting. You have to sieve it out. I would have expected that from the time you hear that, you well-informed media personnel would have said that is not to be taken seriously because the PNM has a process which we all know. I hope I know we all know that because the PNM has contested every single election in this country since 1956. And you know our process of screening, I hope. It's part of the country's history and operations. And you can't just get a VAPS to be screened by the PNM. Okay? I don't know that.
Prime Minister, have you met with the EBC at all to discuss how an election will be held? I know the opposition said they were behind naming candidates because you all hold all the cards in terms of when restrictions will be lifted, so you had a bit of a head start over them. They may say the same thing about knowing when the election date is in the scope.
I don't really want to engage opposition commentary on these matters because usually they're not very worthy of the time. But yes, I personally have not been to the EBC for years, but the party officers interact with the EBC, I think a few weeks ago, or whenever there would have been some kind of meeting. But we are quite comfortable with our Election and Boundaries Commission, so we don't really see a problem requiring any special meeting. We've just taken to the Parliament, I just took to the Parliament the last report required by law, and they made certain suggestions which were accepted quite, and that is the normal thing we do here. We didn't change anything that they recommended. We accepted the recommendations in that report. That's a requirement in the Constitution, and that was done. So the door has been cleared for the a writ to be issued whenever the election is called.
You can't reveal any time frame, September, August, between that period there?
I just give you. Have you ever seen a political leader in this country spell out for you in such detail these things? I just told you. The term of the government comes to an end in September, and an election must be held within 90 days of that. We are in May. Normally, at this time, we might even have had an election called already, or on the verge of it being called. Nothing peculiar is happening. And of course, in our system, the calling of the election is done by the Prime Minister in office. So maybe tomorrow I could call it, or maybe next week. When do you want it?
Vacation. Yeah, when is vacation? So
Mr. Prime Minister, staying with the election, I know you did say that the party has not gone to the EBC with any particular concerns, but of course, given that the election will be held in a pandemic period in any case, any considerations as to how voting will actually take place, staying with public health measures, distance,
Same way by doubles.
You think that the number of persons
Social distancing
to accommodate within that?
I'm sure there would be need for some further focusing on that to ensure that the population is protected. But one good thing is that if we go along the way we're going now, we should be a population that is not highly charged with the virus, and therefore we can come out with hopefully by the time the election comes around, if the steps we are making now go the way we expect, by the time we get to an election, we should be a little less nervous about it and be able to come out. And I expect that some of the restrictions will still be in place. You may still be required to cover your face. You may still be required to do your social distancing. But then that is when you really need to go to the polling station to ensure that what is happening continues to happen well.
Do you believe that this election will be a riskier election politically, because if there's a spike in coronavirus cases, it can influence results?
Well, all elections are risky. I mean, people vote for all kinds of reasons. So, you know, we don't think that anything particularly out of the ordinary will happen. We expect the population, hopefully, by the time the election is called and the election day comes around, that we could safely go to the polling stations. And countries that have had worse conditions than we've had have had elections. But you have to be cognizant of what you're going to be doing. And the public campaign would still be there. The Ministry of Communication, the CMO's office, and our public education systems would continue to steer us along the path that gives us the best result.
Professor, I want to ask you about these, I want to go back to these interests that you say these media houses have. Because, you know, it's so convenient sometimes when we go after one party seeking truth, the other party says, get them, you know, and then when the shoes on the other foot, it's media is bad.
I am not talking about any party and other party and other party.
What
I am talking, you see what I've said? Stay with what I've said. Stay with what I've said. I've said that the media houses that have been so exercised in spreading all that was spread last week, including the paragraph I showed you there, are people who have interest to protect.
Do you think you should have come out and say something sooner then?
No.
Because in the absence of a response from you, we go to experts,
this
we seek commentary, we seek opinion.
This is the time that I want to say that I have to say that, and I've said it. And if there's anybody who wants to challenge me on it, I'm available for that.
I want to go back to elections. Just 3 quick questions. One, can we see an election after the budget? 2, do you have a date already in mind? And 3, what do you think of having fixed date for
Why are you taking
elections?
advantage of my presence here?
You came and you told us
All of us
to
are
do so.
friends.
Well, you're taking advantage of it because I've made myself available, but I'm not going to tell you those answers.
You didn't answer the last
Which one? Which is the last one?
Do you think that we should have fixed date for general elections going forward?
I am not a fan of that. That wouldn't change very much. Countries that have fixed dates, they have problems too. I grew up in the Westminster system, and I'm a bit of a conservative. I like the Westminster system. Maybe I'm a lot older than you are, and I grew up in it. And when you look at, you know, they say democracy over Westminster is a bad system, except all the others are worse. So I cannot subscribe to that.
So no post-budget
Um,
election date?
Again, you see, there are issues to be dealt with at the national level, and I wouldn't want to speculate on that right now, except to say that this year is not a normal year. You know, what we've had to deal with has literally pushed us off some of the traditional things. Normally in April, we would have done a mid-year review of the budget, move some money around, do some additions and subtractions, and prepare for the second half of the budget. So this year we couldn't even do that because we literally the budget was literally exploded. We literally had to construct a budget in a period of a couple of weeks when we were facing a demand that we had not anticipated, and the priority was to ensure that we have a functioning financial response to that. And that is what, in 2020, you didn't have a mid-year review, but you had a number of instances of the Minister of Finance coming to you and saying, listen, I have to spend this, I have to spend that, I have to raise this, I have to raise that, because of what we are dealing with. So there are those who are going to compare what we've done with the traditional budget, but this year was quite a peculiar year, and it was far from traditional.
Mr. Prime Minister, some of our other countries in CARICOM, St. Vincent, for instance, they have been leading the charge as relates to sport. They started a T10 league, and then we saw St. Lucia. They have, leaded the charge again with tourism. They have indicated dates for opening their borders. already within CARICOM there's discussion about regional travel, etc. Do you have any perspective on this? And then as well as, what is TNT leading the charge with?
What are we leading charge with?
Yeah, are we...
You really want me to answer that, eh? Well, let me tell you something. We led the charge with managing the challenge and the threat of COVID. A lot of our CARICOM neighbors patterned their responses after what happened in Trinidad and Tobago. And the other matter, I will go into a little more detail with that on Saturday. We're not too far away from that. Those conversations are taking place. The point you made about intra-regional travel, I'm hoping that that will be our first response to the opening of the border, but it's going to be a peculiar kind, because if Barbados is relatively clean, so is Grenada and St. Vincent, and we go there and bring people back, we can't then just pick up people from Ohio, because if people are coming into those territories, they can't automatically come to Trinidad, because we would then have opened our borders to the world. So we're going to have to work with our CARICOM colleagues in working out a system of travel, which might be baby steps, and go further and further. But the danger to us doesn't lie in Grenada or St. Vincent. It lies beyond that. So whatever travel we do in the coming weeks or so, we have to bear that in mind. And it takes a lot of working out and going in steps. The thing is that some people saying that we're going too slowly, but the danger is if you try to go too fast, you can fall on your face. And the correct pace and the timing, you want a good result. In the end, you want a good result. If what you're going to do is a gamble, and that gamble may not give you a good result, then why take that gamble? You're better off not taking it and dealing with the inconvenience than trying to eliminate the inconvenience and end up with a disaster.
I just have one question. You know, when the pandemic just started, you told us a little bit about your daughter's situation, so I'm going to ask how she's doing in New York.
My daughter is doing fine, but she's doing fine from being, she was at home, working from home, and battened down home all this time when New York was going through, when New York was the real hotspot. But I tell you, we in Trinidad and Tobago, and the Caribbean in particular, we have other problems that will come our way. Because I don't know when last you had paid attention to how much remittances come into our region from the United States. A lot of our Caribbean economy is supported by remittances coming in. Hundreds of millions of dollars come into our region. When you see the amount of people who are unemployed in the United States now, that is also our problem. Because our people in the United States are in that crowd, many of them are in that crowd, and then the remittances and the barrels won't come. And those families that rely on those things are now going to be, but they might not be living in America, but they live here in the Caribbean, and not being able to be supported by those remittances. And those remittances buy our manufactured goods. Yesterday I went to Nestle. A significant portion of their product is exported to CARICOM countries. If they don't get their remittances to buy those products, what is our position here in Trinidad and Tobago? So we are all in this together. And thank you for asking about my daughter. She's doing fine.
I'm so sorry, it was a nice thing to end it, but I need to ask you. I went back into a Guardian article. Remember the day you called the press conference to, where you would have called the opposition leader a traitor? In that press conference, you said, while Rodriguez came with a delegation, no one was introduced before, during, or after the meeting. Present with her, this is a quote from you. Present with her, I am now discovering, was some person called Asdrubal Chavez, who I am now discovering as part of the commission that worked on PDVSA. Meaning that during the meeting, according to your press conference that day, you didn't know who he was.
Mr. Chavez, Senor Chavez. Senor Chavez, accompanying Vice President Delcy Rodriguez.
To you before, during, after.
No one has introduced me. Why are you leaving out the rest of the sentence? Why are you leaving out the rest of the sentence? No one was introduced to me in that room as the president of PDVSA.
He wasn't.
Because the point that was being made by those who were selling the story is that the president of PDVSA came here, and therefore the issue was about oil going to Caracas or to Aruba and to Venezuela. They held on to that for 2 weeks with your assistance. No one.
Oil company that came to a COVID-19 national security meeting.
I am not. I've been to Venezuela, or Venezuelans have come here. They brought generals, they bring admirals, they bring businessmen. So I am not to tell the delegation who should come or who shouldn't come. I went to Ghana last month, 2 months ago. In my delegation was Dr. John Alleyne. He's an agriculture specialist. You could ask, what is he doing there? Eh? Delegations have come here from Africa with all kinds of people. So it is not for me to say who the delegation was, but don't get away from the error that you have been making, that there were a number of people on the plane, and the Prime Minister must have known. And you beat that like a drum. As I stand before you now, I held the portfolio for a while now, and I'm still holding it, the portfolio of Minister of Planning and Development. I wouldn't be surprised if something happens in Rampanalgas about a planning approval for something, and then somebody gets up and says, you ask me about it like you're asking me now, and I said, I don't know. And you would say, how you don't know? Look the letter here. The minister has granted the approval for the landslide that took place up there, because every single approval that is granted in the Town and Country Department, signed by the Director of Town and Country Planning, it says that the minister has granted this approval. Right? And if you take the position that since that is so, I must know who got an approval in Rampanalgas or Ohio, then you're just being, you're not being serious.
Comparing that to one other person being in a room with the Minister and Vice President, you wouldn't want to know who
It wasn't one other
person was. It was you, Minister Young, Minister Moses, you said, Mr. Rodriguez, and Senor Chavez. Were there other people?
And Jesus. No, there was nobody else.
I'm asking.
There were 5 people in the meeting. Let me repeat it. 5 people for the umpteenth time. There were 5 people in the meeting. 3 from Trinidad and Tobago. All 3 are members of the National Security Council. The chairman, which was the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the Minister of National Security. 3 of us. And 2 from Venezuela. The Vice President, who a week before she requested the meeting, had been made the person in charge of Venezuela's response to COVID. That meeting was requested in early March when I was out of the country. I was in Ghana. When I came back from Ghana, I was told that such a meeting was requested by the person who is in charge of COVID response in Venezuela. Because I'll tell you something. Before I heard that, we were here very, very nervous about what could happen in Venezuela and what would have happened to us if things go pear-shaped down there, So when I heard that the person in charge of the COVID response in Venezuela wants to speak to me, I'm interested. And then the meeting was scheduled for the 16th of March. It didn't take place on the 16th of March. It took place on the 27th of March. And the meeting lasted about half an hour, 45 minutes. I've seen published in my country that the meeting took place in the dead of night, and the country didn't know. 1 minute after that meeting took place, I walked out of the room, and this office issued a statement mid-afternoon. Immediately, a statement was issued to this country from the office of the Prime Minister. Do you think that bothered any of those who want to say otherwise? And then they put all that together. You know what Sancoach is? You know what a Sancoach is? Last week was Sancoach week. Put everything in the pot, right? And hope it tastes good in the end. And then discover your false teeth fall out.
Prime Minister, what came out of that meeting at the end of the day, after all is said and done?
What came out of it?
Yeah, in terms of...
You sold a lot of papers.
Well, we always sell a lot of papers.
No, we don't.
What was the bottom line for the Venezuelans? What impact did they receive from that meeting?
They monitor. I mean, we monitor their situation there, and they monitor us, and that was quickly.
No, I'm sorry, I meant the Venezuelans that are
In Trinidad and Tobago. Well, we were offered. The Venezuelans offered us test kits for them, and we didn't accept it because we didn't want to run two parallel systems in the country. The kits that they were using were those the one PCR kits, and the reliability is the one with the lower reliability. So we didn't want to do that. We thought we had committed ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago to managing whichever human being is within our border. If you're carrying that virus or you had symptoms or you pose a threat, you fall part of the system. So we didn't accept that. We kept our border closed. We asked for firming of the border because now more than ever we wanted the border to be closed, and our Coast Guard and their people over there ensure, and you would have seen us from time to time apprehending people and sending them back, turning them back, and so on. So those things took place, and it appears as though from all reports that things went fairly well down there in terms of the level of infection in Venezuela. We haven't heard about any explosion as in happening in some other countries in Europe or in Asia and so on. So we keep our fingers crossed that things are going reasonably well for us here in this part of the world. A little further south is not happening that way. A little further north is not happening that way. And those of us in the Caribbean, I mean, climate fixes us up.
Was the government at all concerned, worried, perturbed that the government that the Venezuelans were running from were coming to offer assistance to them?
The what?
The government that the Venezuelans who were in Trinidad and Tobago were running from, the Maduro government, they came to Trinidad to somehow help them.
Well, I didn't see any response like that because, I mean, when you are in difficulty, I don't know that you would be as choosy as you would be if you are not in that difficulty. Because you must remember, don't forget where we came from, eh? In February, after the January news, where we saw that pandemic sweeping westwards, in February there was a real threat to us here in Trinidad and Tobago, all of us, not just the Venezuelan population, the Trinidad and Tobago population, the Caribbean population. We had a number of CARICOM contact meetings trying to figure out how are we going to deal with this, especially there are countries in our region, our CARICOM neighbors who we rely on to buy our products and who rely on us to support them if they get into difficulty. Their entire economy is based on tourism. Every plane is grounded. Right? Some countries have one hospital, and you're facing a pandemic. Those are the issues that we faced in February. Right? We've opened our borders on a couple of occasions. A couple of nights ago, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent called me. There was an explosion in a gas station in St. Vincent. 2 people dead, 1 burnt, seriously burnt. Can you help? We got to get the person into hospital in Trinidad and Tobago. We opened the border, and we got the person here. Right? We've had a child from Barbados needing urgent medical care, requiring to get into a hospital in Trinidad. We opened the border, a medical ambulance came in. Unfortunately, the child passed away. But that's what we do. That's what governments do. If there are no further questions, maybe I should go back into hiding. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you all very much for accurate reporting.